Just like brown sugar and bacon, rock music and horror movies just meshed perfectly back in the 80s. I mean, sure, they're fine individually, they're standalone, standouts, but when you put them together, it's a marriage made in heaven. And any kind of rock music when I was a kid, I was into. I didn't care if it was hair bands, I didn't care if it was heavy metal, I just wanted to listen to it. There was always also that myth when you were a kid about if you played your record backwards, you could summon demons, you could open up the gates of hell, or you could just really, really piss off your mother by the amount of turntables that you're messing up trying to summon something. Happened to me all the time when I was young. But this was yet another thing that tightly tethered me to 1987's The Gate. Because the boys in this movie find out exactly how bad of an idea that is. And we're going to talk about it right now. This movie here is centered around little badass Steven Dorff, and what I think is the first time I'd ever seen him on the silver screen. He plays Glenn here, who's a typical little man who loves his rockets and the trouble that they get him into. He's got an older sister who's actually pretty legit. She's a cool, you don't see that too often in these movies. Usually the older siblings are bullies up until the end of the movie. She's pretty cool throughout this whole thing. He's got a friend, Terry, who's a bit bigger. I don't know if he's older, but he's definitely taller. And a mom and a dad who do well enough to afford a very nice house in a very nice part of town, which, for those of you keeping track, perfect recipe for an 80s horror film. Now, Glenn is moving through some sort of a nightmare here at the beginning of this movie regarding his tree and his tree house that's in his backyard. Now, when he wakes up, the tree's been removed, tree house has obviously been removed, and there's just a giant hole in the yard where the roots of the tree used to be buried. In inspecting this, though, Glenn finds a geode that is busted open, and he thinks it's great, it's cool, there's crystals all on the inside of it, it's got a purple hue. You don't find stuff like that all the time, you don't see them every day. Glenn is excited to show his buddy Terry exactly what he stumbled upon. Now, the story here with Terry is he's recently suffered a loss, his mother's died, but he's always been Glenn's best friend, and he rushes over with dollar signs in his eyes because he's convinced if they can find a lot of these things, they're going to make some money off of them. So the big hole becomes even bigger, and they do wind up finding one that is intact. It's not busted open. It looks about the shape of a bowling ball, and they're very excited, but they hear noises coming from the hole that they've now made that much bigger, and eventually insects start to fly out from it. Now these, for me, as a viewer, major red flags. The family here is a pretty basic one, and that's not a bad thing, because in the 80s, a strong home life is usually a good thing for a couple of different reasons. One, it gives the character something to lose, and two, it gives you that sense of dread that we're in a horror movie. Something bad is going to happen to some of these people. Dad, mom, older sister, and then Glenn. Also a dog, family dog of course, named Angus. Everybody in the 80s had to have one of those. But right away I didn't like the mom. She had a bad haircut, she was wearing earrings that made her look like Miss Potato Head, and then she had to drop the tried and true line to Glenn when she asked him, if your friend jumped off of a bridge, would you do it? It's not very original, lady, you can do better. And then we get just a shade of foreshadowing here when Glenn asks his father at bedtime about a story that Terry told him involving two workers building the house that they currently live in. The story goes, one guy died, the other guy didn't want to report it, so he sealed him up into one of the walls. Now, you'd think that the guy would start stinking after a certain amount of time, but I like spooky stories as much as the next middle-aged YouTube phenom does, so I let it pass. The brother and sister tandem, though, they wind up talking mom and dad into leaving them alone for a long weekend because the old folks have got to go do their old folk thing, and as a married couple, I know once you can get away with the wife, it is a lot of fun. No kids. We won't get into that right now. But it makes a lot of sense because Alexandra, I believe she's about to be 16, so they should be fine alone. You think, right? Wrong. Alex throws a rager of a teenage 80s party, and while the hormones are going haywire downstairs, Glenn and Terry are upstairs trying to break into that giant geode. And when they do, some smoke comes out of it, some mist, and then there is a magic slate board laying on the desk right next to the geode as it's cracked open, and all of these different markings and lettering and just strange symbols wind up showing up on this board. Naturally, because this is what you do when something like that happens, you try to recite what's written down. Not Not a good idea, guys. Come on. Now, I was reasonably popular as a teenager, but I've never been to a teen party that when it breaks up, all the leftovers are sitting around in a circle telling spooky stories to one another. Both of the boys wind up getting caught sneaking downstairs, and then one of the more loud, boisterous guys decides, hey, we've been trying to make so-and-so levitate. How about we make somebody a little bit lighter try it instead? Grab Glenn, and it works. They're actually able to levitate this kid, and Glenn falls, gets hurt, cries. He's really embarrassed. He's crying in front of all these different people, some of which he doesn't even know, and nobody, absolutely no one, seems freaked out at all that this kid was just levitating throughout the air. Nobody holding on to him. He's just floating. So Terry ends up having a hallucination about his dead mom coming over to see him. And he's downstairs and he's holding her, and it makes you sad because it's got to be a gut punch to a little boy to lose his mom that young. And being a mama's boy when I was a kid, I get it. But when Glenn comes downstairs to see what Terry's up to, he realizes that Terry is not holding what he feels like is his mother. He's under the assumption he's cradling his mother. That's his mother's hair by his cheek. Terry is actually holding the family's now dead dog Angus in his arms, not his mom. And now this is all night one, mind you. The very next day, Terry seems to have gotten over what happened to him the night before because he's back at his house. He's wrapped in a blanket. He's listening to heavy metal, and he's mouthing the words off of one of his favorite albums. And as he does so, he's starting to realize everything this singer's talking about is relative to the hole in the ground, the geode, the levitation. All of it ties in. Then he gets the album cover, because album covers back in the day had all sorts of cool stuff on them. It had lots of illustrations. If you got one with the lyrics, that was even better. Album covers were like books. It was awesome. But he gets the album cover, he looks at the artwork, and he sees all of it has something to do with what happened to all of them the day before. He races over to Glenn's house with all the info he's got now. Alexandra is pressured to go shopping and to the beach by her friends, but Glenn is very bummed out about the loss of his dog. And we see a bit about how great of a relationship the brother and sister do have, because when Alex comes home early and Glenn wants to know why she didn't go to the beach, she explains, I can't go to the beach, I spent all my money, and she shows Glenn a brand new rocket that she just bought for him. And Glenn smiles, and she smiles, and it's a feel-good moment. I like that for Glenn. Terry winds up joining the party, and Glenn immediately buys into every single thing that he's telling him about the album and the gate. Impressionable young minds are a beautiful thing sometimes. But not too long after that, the Bimbo Squad shows up, and they take Alexandra from the boys. That's when the crazy starts. When the house is full of hormones and teenagers again, night 2 kicks in, and this one's a doozy. Get a classic old school scare here when it's bedtime and Terry is on the floor next to Glenn's bed. Glenn hears a noise, gets up to investigate, winds up, the window explodes and blows inward on him. Now it freaks Glenn out, and he runs to Alexandra's room to get his big sister. As they come back in, they notice that there's movement under Terry's blanket, but he's not really stirred much considering Glenn was just screaming and a window just exploded. So they go to shake Terry's shoulder. And then Terry walks in behind him and says, hey guys, what's going on? Who's under the blanket if it's not Terry? Pull the blanket back, it's Angus the dead dog. Very, very unsettling. Now the screaming and the weirdness really begins. And a couple parts in this movie at the very end, this third act, stuck with me as a kid. And one of them was Terry going out to the gate, as we now know it, and he falls down into it, and it feels like he's fallen for a couple of miles. So immediately, you're stressed because how are they going to get him out of there? Did you see how far he just fell? How are Glenn and his big sister going to get him out of that hole? And then he gets down there, and these little creepy looking demons that looked a lot like a couple of guys I used to work with at Menards back in the day, they show up, and eventually they start biting into this kid. One of them crawls behind his shoulder and bites him on the neck. Another one bites his finger, and they just start gnawing on him. Eventually, there's a couple of dozen that are holding on to his legs, trying to get him from going back up through that hole. That one was really tough on me. Then we find out that the story of the worker being buried in the wall is kind of sort of true, because we get to a point in this movie where this dude busts through the wall like he's the Kool-Aid man, takes a hold of Terry, and carries him off into the wall. What the f***? And on top of that, he winds up coming back for Alex not too much longer. Now there is a scene where she smacks this dude, she's a fighter, smacks him in the head with a boombox. And if you know anything about boomboxes, we love boomboxes here at Aging Gracefully. They're fantastic, but they also weigh about 3,000 pounds. So the fact that she could pick it up and smack this dude was fantastic to me as a kid. And then the dude falls, and he like literally bursts into dozens of these little demons. And they scamper off, but then he winds up coming back, and he actually carries away Alexandra from her brother. Now, this was a scary creature, and I did not care for this guy whatsoever. Now, leaving Glenn alone, it really worried me because his folks weren't there, Terry got taken, Alex got grabbed up, and it was just Steven Dorff against demons from hell. And sad as you may have been for his friend and his sister in that moment, you just knew Steven Dorff was going to wreck shop. I mean, this is Deacon Frost we're talking about. Now, he winds up somehow, he gets picked up by this much, much bigger, crazy looking demon that's probably cuter than he needed to be, picks up Steven Dorff's character, drops him, and he winds up with a third eye on the center of his palm. That freaked me out as a kid. Big time. And then later when he stabs that third eye with a shard of glass, ooh, hated it. Glenn gathers what he needs for this giant rocket that his dad confiscated some time ago, as he figures this is his best chance of taking a stand, and he goes into the final battle armed with one of his toy model rockets. So for me, this is well done American horror. It wasn't like anything I had seen before, and the movie bothered me so much that I only watched it sparingly as a kid. And that's the indicator of a great horror film. Now, slasher movies I love because you can watch them over and over again. It's just carnage candy. As a kid, those are the first times you usually see beautiful women in various states of undress. The killer is usually very cool, but movies like this, these kind of one-off movies, they're great too, because if they've got a good story that can prop them up, you know, they can age gracefully. They can stand the test of time, and I really felt this one does that. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I thought it was very clever. I thought it was very scary. I liked the way they did a lot of things. I love the practical effects. Some of it was a little over the top and gross, but it worked based on the story, based on what these kids were dealing with. It just made sense, and everything kind of just meshed really well together in this movie. And obviously Steven Dorff would go on to have a great career, but The Gate, worth checking out. Give it a look. This is Aging Gracefully. I am Matthew Essex. If you enjoy any of this, consider subscribing. It makes me feel like a big shot when I run to my kids and say, hey, somebody else is liking the channel. Look at this. My daughters think it's cool. I think it's cool. So help me be cool to my daughters. I'd appreciate that. See you on the other side.